Hello, BYW students. It's Mr. O'Sullivan. Today we're going to be looking at Lesson 8-1, Features of a Parabola, or just Parabola Features. And today's learning target is I can identify the features of a parabola by examining a graph. So when exploring functions, there are many key parts associated with them. So for instance, this whole unit, we're going to be looking at the quadratic function, or the parabola. Okay? So we're going to be exploring this over the next few weeks, so buckle up. Let's get familiar with some of the terminology. You're going to be hearing myself and Miss Townsend say vertex, X-Intercepts, roots, zeros, and solutions. You're also going to hear us say axis of symmetry. And you're also going to hear us say Y-Intercept. So let's go through these definitions. So the vertex of a parabola is the highest or lowest point. It's also known as the maximum or minimum of a parabola. So depending on the way your parabola is drawn, you will have either a max or a min. It is always written as the ordered pair x comma y. So your vertex is a point. Okay? So if I look here, here's my vertex. If I look here, so this is my vertex and this is my vertex. So if you look, I'm going up and then I go back down. This is an example of a maximum. And if you look, I go down to come back up. This is an example of a minimum. The reason why is because this is your lowest point, while this is your highest point. Your X-intercepts, also called your roots, your zeros, and your solutions. These are the points where your parabola crosses the x-axis. Miss Townsend and I are going to most likely just stick with X-intercepts, but if you ever see a question that says the word roots, zeros, or solutions, it's the exact same thing. It's the points where your parabola crosses the x-axis. It's always written as the ordered pair, x comma 0, and y is always going to be 0, exclamation point. However, you're not always going to have an x-intercept. If you look at this parabola, it doesn't cross your x-axis. If you look at this parabola, it only crosses once. And if you look at this parabola, it crosses twice. So you do have three different situations. Your axis of symmetry. This is an equation, and you must always write x equals a number, because your axis of symmetry is actually the equation of a line that's going to be drawn into your image. A way to remember this is axis has an x in it. So x is the same thing as saying x equals. Just a little note. Every parabola has an axis of symmetry, which is the line that divides the graph into two perfect halves. It can be found using the formula x equals negative b over 2a. We're going to learn how to do that in a few days. Your vertex lies on the axis of symmetry. So your vertex is going to be on the axis of symmetry, just like here. So if you look, I can draw in a line, and it will look the exact same on both sides of my parabola. That's what we mean by axis of symmetry. It's symmetrical. A Y-intercept. This is the point where your parabola crosses the y-axis. It is written as the ordered pair, 0 comma y. X is always going to be 0. Another way to find this, if you're just given the equation, is just plug in 0 for x. Okay? So if I look here, this is my y-axis. This is my x-axis. Here's my y-intercept. So if you look, we have two different problems. We have one where the image is labeled, and we have one where the image is not labeled. What we're going to do is we're going to focus on the image that's labeled first. Practice. Identify the key features for each of the parabolas. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to identify the vertex. If you remember, your vertex, we said, is an ordered pair that's written as x comma y. So I'm going to write that note, x comma y. Axis of symmetry, we said we write as x equals. Your x-intercepts are, you can write as x equal, or you can write them as x comma 0. Your y-intercept, you can write as y equals, or you can write as 0 comma y. And then we'll get into the open up and open down afterwards. So your vertex for this graph is basically where your turning point occurs. So if you look, I go down, and then I turn up around. So my vertex is exactly right where I pointed it out to be. So my x value for my vertex is 1. My y value is negative 4. So I would say my vertex is 1, negative 4. Axis of symmetry. We said the axis of symmetry goes through your vertex. So all you have to think about is, what's the x value of your vertex? It's a 1. So my axis of symmetry is x equals 1, which is why it's drawn in at x equals 1 like this. Your x-intercepts, basically where your graph crosses the x-axis. If you look, your graph crosses the x-axis in 2 spots, here and here. So if I look at these numbers, I have -1 and I have 3. So I can say x equals -1 and x equals 3, or I can write them as ordered pairs. I can write -1, 0, and I can write 3, 0. That's another way I can write my x-intercepts. Your y-intercepts is basically where your graph crosses the y-axis. So let's look. My graph crosses the y-axis right here. What number is that? Very good, it's -3. So I can say y equals -3. Or I can write this as 0, -3. Now, does my graph open upwards or downwards? If you look, here's my trick. If your graph looks like this, you can draw a smiley face. So that opens upward. If your graph looks like this, it's a frowny face. So it's downward. So if I look at this graph right here, is it opening upward or is it opening downward? Very good, it's opening upward. So I'm just going to write down opens upward. Now let's go on to this graph where we have a lot of missing information. This graph asks us to find our vertex. So remember, your vertex is where your graph turns around. So if I look, I go up and up and up and up and up and up, and then boom, I turn back around. So my vertex is going to occur right here. So I need to ask myself what the x-coordinate is. Well, if you look, I start at 0. I go out, boom, -5. What's my y-coordinate? 9. So my vertex is -5, 9. Your vertex is also called your turning point, where your graph turns around. Okay. The next part, we want to find our axis of symmetry. So for your axis of symmetry, that is the x value of your vertex. So what's the x value of your vertex? -5. So my axis of symmetry is x equals -5. Now if I want, I can draw my axis of symmetry going through. And write in axis of symmetry. Your x-intercepts, where your graph crosses the x-axis. So if I look at what values, let's change it up to yellow. At what x values does my graph cross the x-axis? Very good. It crosses it here and here. So at -8 and -2. So I can say x equals -8, x equals -2, or I can write them as ordered pairs. So -8, 0, and -2, 0. Okay. Your y-intercepts. I have a question. Do you see your graph cross the y-axis at all? Good. I don't either. So for this image, we would say no y-intercept shown. And then does it open upward or downward? And if you look, it opens downward. And that's it. Don't forget to complete your Delta Math. If you have any questions, please email myself or Miss Townsend. Have a great day, BYW students.